Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Are you looking for the biggest, baddest, meanest, most amazing GTX 1080 Ti on the market today? You have come to the right place. MSI's GeForce GTX 1080 Ti Gaming X Trio Triple Fan graphics card. Yes, that's a mouthful, and yes, this is a whole lot of graphics card. Today, I'm mostly talking about the Gaming X Trio. I will compare it briefly to the other 1080 Ti cards, explain what I think it should be on your shortlist, offer you a couple of alternative suggestions if this doesn't work for you. I will provide you with a couple of charts later in the video, including price to performance ratio with the 1080 Ti versus some cards beneath it, and then ultimately who should be looking at a 1080 Ti in general. First, let me start off with why this card is so awesome and amazing. Now, I have a lot of 1080 Ti cards, so it takes a lot to impress me personally. If you don't have one, any 1080 Ti is going to be pretty cool. But once you've got a half a dozen of them, it takes something special to really push a card over the top. This card gave me an honest-to-goodness wow moment when I took it out of the packaging and out of the bag. It really does look impressive in person. Frankly, the cards on the desk here don't necessarily convey what they look like in person. This is a wow card. This is one of those that just takes it a step above the rest. Looking at it in person, feeling how heavy and big it really is, how thick it is. I'll show you a couple of shots here in a second. But it really is very impressive. If you're looking for a showpiece, if you're looking for something that just screams, look at me from across the room, you have definitely come to the right place. But it goes beyond just looks. Heat, noise are the other two aspects of this card. Now let me get performance out of the way right away. The performance of this card is faster than most of the other 1080 Ti's, but not by enough that matters. The percentage difference between the fastest and the slowest custom-cooled 1080 Ti in the market is 1 or 2%. They're extremely minor. They're all overclockable, so you certainly can overclock them. It does have a bigger cooler, so possibly you can overclock it further. But don't buy this or any other graphics card just because you think you're getting superior performance. The reality is that's not why you buy these. First of all, you do it because it just looks awesome. Second of all, you do it because you want the RGB, you want the size and etc. You want the features. But most importantly, you do it for sound and noise. This is the quietest, coolest running 1080 Ti I have tested, bar none. Quieter than the For the Win 3, quieter than the Asus ROG Strix back there, quieter than the Gigabyte Aorus Extreme. Now, those are very quiet cards. They're very good cards. I have no problems recommending them. But once you've used this, yeah, therein lies the challenge. Pretend I have no 1080 Ti's whatsoever, and I have to go out right now and buy a 1080 Ti for myself, knowing what I personally know right now. There is no question in my mind I would buy this in a heartbeat. It is $30 to $60 more expensive than some of these other cards, absolutely. It's worth it in my opinion. Once you've stepped up to the premium card, once you've gone, yeah, I'm going to spend $700+ on just a video card, I'm okay with that. Is another $30 to $60 really going to break the bank? Well, maybe that's a personal decision for you. But in my mind, once you've gone premium, go premium. Don't play around with it. Don't cheat yourself out of another $30 or $60 to not get the card that you really want. And having used this, I'm extremely impressed. Now, I've mentioned sound and noise several times. Let me give you two specific examples. When I started benchmarking this card for the first full 2 minutes, I did go back and time it, the fans did not turn at all. This is the only card I have that's true on. Every other card turns the fans before them. Now, please note that all 1080 Ti's, except for the blower style cards, have a 0 fan speed mode. When you're just in Windows, when you're watching YouTube videos, when you're browsing the web, none of these cards turn their fans. They're all 100% silent because there's no fan speed. But once you actually start using the card, the fans start turning. 2 full minutes, full 100% stress test load with the card running at 2 gigahertz, and the fans did not turn. And the card heated up to 64 degrees Celsius at the 2-minute mark when the fans started turning. 64 is nothing for these cards. That is completely within normal operating temperature. So the large air cooler on this was able to hold it to 64 degrees for 2 minutes under 100% load. That's pretty good. 10 minutes later, with full stress test, The card was at about 70 degrees Celsius and the fans were at 1100 RPM. If you turn the fans up manually, you can get this card down to 50 or even less in terms of temperature. It's ridiculously cool running. 1100 RPM is so slow on these fans that even when you put your ear to it, it makes virtually no noise. It's only a couple of decibels louder than the ambient sounds in the room. It is virtually silent. If you want the quietest card, at least that I've ever tested on the market, if you want the coolest running card, if you want something that even under a multi-hour gaming session is going to make no noise and virtually no heat, you're looking at it. Now keep in mind, of course, that if this is in a small closed case, it's going to exhaust heat inside the case. The case has to have a way to expel that. That is certainly going to be an issue. If you put this in a case with no ventilation, well, everything I just said doesn't apply. Are you really installing an $800 graphics card in a little tiny micro ATX case? I hope not. And if you are, stop that. But with appropriate cooling, such as a full tower case, that's a beast. Quick comparison to the other cards. This is the standard Gaming X. This is the Gaming X Trio. Trio for 3 fans. They are the same rough height. These fans are slightly larger because they have to make them smaller to fit 3 on there. This is also very cool and very quiet running. It runs about $30 less expensive in most cases than this card. If you do not have the room for the length of this card, if your case just doesn't have the room with drive trays or something else, by all means, get the Gaming X. The Gaming X cooler is exceptional. These fans are very quiet. I would have no problems recommending this. Except this exists, and if it fits, then for $30 more, it's a no-brainer in my mind. Now, if you have a case that doesn't have a lot of Z height, if you need a card that is shorter, that's what the Duke is for. Or if you don't want RGB and you don't want the red, because you can see it's a plain black and white color. The Duke is about $60 less than the Gaming X Trio, or $30 less than the Gaming X. Now, the fans are smaller. It is a 2-slot instead of a 2.5-slot card. Both of the Gaming X cards are 2.5 slots thick, whereas this is only 2 slots. So if thickness is an issue, if you have other cards, or perhaps you're doing 2 cards in SLI, which I normally don't recommend, but if you are, or you have other expansion cards, then do consider that this is a standard 2-slot card. It is a long card. You can see how long it is, so you do have to be aware that when you trade the height, you're just getting a longer card. Out of the box, as I said, very minor performance differences. This does run a little bit hotter. It does run slightly louder. Not much, but it is a little bit. And as I said before, once you're going to the top dog, get the Gaming X Trio. Now, I mentioned the cards behind me earlier. I don't have them on the desk because they're all installed in something. And frankly, I ultimately decided not to rip apart 4 machines just to pull all the cards out and show them to you. But I will say that if length and height and thickness are issues, the Superclock 2 on the bottom you see down there is a very good choice. That card is also about $60 less than the Gaming X Trio, and because of its smaller size, again, it's going to run a little bit hotter and a little bit louder than this is, but it will fit into more machines. This really requires a pretty big case to fit it. So if you need a more standard size card, that's the one I would buy. It is, for its size, probably the best one on the market at that size today. Now, what about the Gigabyte Aorus Extreme or the Asus ROG Strix? They're fine. The Gigabyte Aorus Extreme is installed in my Ryzen 7 1700. I used it for 6 months until I replaced it with my Skylake X system. It's a good card. It's a quiet card. I've not had any problems with it whatsoever. The Asus ROG Strix is now installed in my streaming computer downstairs. If you watch me live streaming on Twitch, that's what I've been using now for almost 2 months. While both of those cards are slightly hotter and slightly louder than this, not so much that it bothers me or caused me to change them in any way. I'm simply saying that today, right now, if I were to go out and buy a card right now, I would spend the extra money to buy this versus those. But if you already have those, don't worry about it. It's not a huge difference. It's just, this really is a gorgeous card. I'm now going to show you a couple of charts, one performance and a dollar cost per frame per second chart to give you an idea of whether the 1080 Ti is worth it, whether you want to step up to it. I will have a full comparison with more of these charts in a future upcoming video. Consider this just to be a little bit of a teaser to give you something to whet your appetite until we get there. Please remember, links in the description below to all of these cards to both Amazon and Newegg. If you found this interesting, fun, whatever, you decide to buy one, please consider using those when you're shopping. I appreciate it. On to the charts. The first chart I'm showing you is Ghost Recon Wildlands High Detail 1080p. At high detail, frankly, a GTX 1080 Ti is completely unnecessary, at least in 2017. At Ultra, that's a different story. I don't have all 6 cards tested at Ultra, so I'm not showing it to you today, but I will show that to you in a future video. But frankly, high detail performs much better. Just to give you a simple idea, the 1080 Ti Ultra Detail really struggles to do over 70 frames per second at 1080p. Ultra's crushing. High detail is a great compromise between price and performance. But I would like to point out to you that the $250 GTX 1066 gig runs over 60 frames per second just fine, so it saves a huge amount of money. Really, the 1080 Ti is more meant for 1440p and 4K. Moving on to the 1440p chart, you can see here that a GTX 1070 still runs over 60 frames per second, and frankly, a 1060 is not bad. Please keep in mind that this is the game's built-in benchmark. In the real game, during busy, heavy fighting scenes, you can lose as many as 20 frames per second when there's a lot going on. I showed this in a live gameplay versus benchmark video I did a couple of weeks ago. That being said, a 1070 is still a great choice, and at $400 is a lot less expensive than a 1080 Ti. But if you want high frame rates, if you want to maintain over 60 frames per second 100% of the time, if you want 100 frames per second average, you actually do need a 1080 Ti. It is also worth noting that Ghost Recon Wildlands is now more than 6 months old. As new games come out into 2018 and beyond, do you want to continue to maintain high levels of performance? If you're buying a card for right now this year only, sure, a mid-level card does 1440p just fine. Do you want to get 3 years of use out of your card? 1440p high detail, a GTX 1070 is not going to do it. It's a great 3-year 1080p card. It's maybe 18 months at 1440p. This chart shows the dollar cost per frame per second. Lower is better. Now, of course, the $250 GTX 1060 is the best value, but if it doesn't provide enough frames, it doesn't really matter. I include it simply for reference. You can see on the legend at the top the prices that I used. Of course, if you pay more or less than a card than you see here, you need to adjust the numbers. Divide whatever you pay for the card by the previous chart's frame rate number to get the number that you see here. Now, it is true that I'm using $750 for the GTX 1080 Ti, and the card I'm reviewing today is $800. Why is that? Because you can absolutely pay less than that. In fact, you can pay less than $750. I'm simply using an average. Please keep in mind that dollar cost per frame per second does not take into account noise, temperature, heat, etc. You can certainly get better value for the money if you don't care about noise and temperature, but in this particular case, I'm simply picking a middle level price. Today in 2017, the real deals are the GTX 1070 or the GTX 1080. I would skip the 1070 Ti, it's really not worth the extra money. But the 1070 and the 1080 present great value for the money. But as I said before, if you're just buying a card for the next year to 18 months and you think you're going to upgrade to the next card that comes out in a year, sure, great, buy those, get great use out of them at 1440p. Do you want a card that you can just skip the next generation and keep for the next 3 years? That's where the 1080 Ti may actually have a better value in the long run, even if it doesn't today. $7.01 per frame per second on average versus $5.56 per frame per second is certainly more expensive. You do pay a bit of a premium to have the best card on the market, but that's today in today's games. Take these same numbers and divide them against a game 2 years from now, 1440p high, and these numbers are going to shift a bit. In fact, the 1070 may not do it. So I think that the best 3-year 1440p card is the 1080 Ti, even if it is a bit more expensive today. That leads us into the 4K benchmark results. Full stop. You want to play the latest, greatest games at 4K resolution? It's 1080 Ti or bust. Yes, you can play Ghost Recon Wildlands on a GTX 1070 or GTX 1080. The 1080 does 50 frames per second average in the built-in benchmark, 38 frames per second minimum. You may very well say, well, that's pretty good, that's okay. I assure you from having tried it in combat when there's explosions and helicopters and trucks and other things going on, that 1050 will drop down to 30 frames per second really quickly in heavy combat. It will do it, but it's rough. Now you can lower the detail settings, turn off shadows, go down to medium, and you'll get better frame rates. Do you really have a 4K monitor and a high-end gaming computer and a $500 graphics card so you can play at low to medium detail? Really? Yeah, I don't think so. If you really have a 1080, even if you've got a 4K monitor, set it to 1440p at high detail. In my opinion, 1440p high detail looks much better than 4K at low or even medium at times. Now, to be sure, if you're playing Overwatch, Destiny 2, Rainbow Six Siege, if you're playing Grand Theft Auto 5, you don't need a 1080 Ti for 4K. All of those games will actually play at 4K just fine on a 1070 or 1080. The 1080 Ti is for Ghost Recon Wildlands, Mass Effect Andromeda, Call of Duty World War II, Battlefield 1, those types of games. If you want the pretty, shiny, beautiful games that are high-end AAA style games, that's where this is really needed. But for Overwatch, no, a 1070 actually does that at 4K just fine. Finally, we have the dollar cost per frame per second at 4K resolution. Yes, the 1080 Ti is 15% more expensive per frame per second than the 1070 and the 1080 are. But then again, if they're not playable, it doesn't really matter. It is within reason. It's a small premium for the performance. But again, top dog tax. You're paying a bit of a premium to have the best card on the market. And finally, the last chart, I take all three resolutions and stuff them together in one chart for you so you don't have to browse the video around and take a look at them. As I said earlier in the video, I'm going to be doing a comparison of all these top-end cards, and I'll include Vega 56 as well in a future upcoming video. But the short answer is for 1080p, the value is really a GTX 1070 or 1080 if you find a good deal on one. For 1440p, I really recommend a 1080 if you can afford it, but a 1070 will do it. But if you want ultra-wide or high frame rates, you need a 1080 Ti. And then for 4K, it's 1080 Ti or bust. Notice I don't mention Vega very much. It really isn't worth considering with the current reference cards. I will revisit Vega once we have some aftermarket cooled cards, but the reference cards are hot, loud, and noisy, and the liquid cooled simply cost too much. Well, there you have a small taste of the benchmarks coming in the upcoming high-end NVIDIA graphics card comparison, which I will include the Vega in there as well, but that's just sort of a little bit of a teaser on that upcoming video. I will say that all of the 1080 Ti's are awesome. If you have one, don't worry about it. Enjoy it. It's great. Don't think for 1 minute I would ever recommend you replace any of these cards with this. There's not that much of a difference. I'm simply suggesting on a new purchase right now, if you're watching this video and you don't own any of them, that the relative price difference between these is minor when you consider the total price of your computer. Now, you may not care about the appearance of your card. You may not care about a couple of decibels of noise or a couple of degrees of temperature Celsius, and that's fine. Perhaps you prefer a different brand, or you prefer a card without the RGB lighting, or that's not quite so big and large. That's fine. They're all great cards. But I'm from Texas, and we like things that are big and huge, and this card is a beast. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below. Questions and comments in the comment section, and as always, check the links in the video description. Those links go to Amazon and Newegg for all of these cards. This will be right at the top there for you, and then I'll have the rest down below. Those links are affiliate links. They do support the channel. Please consider using them when you're shopping. It really does make a difference. Thank you to MSI for sending me these cards. They are very, very nice. I just wish I got to keep the Gaming X cards. For those of you curious, they're letting me keep the Duke. I have to send the Gaming X cards back, which kind of made me sad because this really is pretty impressive. But you know what? They're all very nice, and whichever one you have, the 1080 Ti is an incredible amount of performance for the money. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.